Have you ever sat in your kitchen, feeling like everything was just fine, until your body seemed to whisper that something wasn't right? That's exactly what happened to Mr. Alvin, 74 years old, living just outside Denver. That morning, he was pouring his usual cup of coffee. His hand suddenly shifted slightly. The cup slipped just a bit. No numbness. No pain. No twitching. Just a tiny moment. And then everything felt normal again. But for me, as a brain doctor who works with older adults, I've learned one thing: it's the silent moments like that are the real stroke warning signs. Because so often, they're actually silent stroke signs. No drama. No panic. They arrive quietly, like a gentle wave brushing through the brain, but they leave behind a crack you can't see. We call it a TIA, a transient ischemic attack. Many people call it a mini-stroke. But I always tell my patients, there's nothing mini about your brain crying for help. This is one of the early stroke symptoms that so many people over 60 miss. A flicker inside the brain, warning that your blood vessels are tired. And if we ignore it, the real stroke could hit at any moment. And that very moment is when the 30-day countdown begins. 30 days, to let your brain recover, to help your blood vessels find their rhythm again. 30 days, to protect your speech, your memory, your clarity. Let me walk with you on that journey. And you'll see, just 30 days can change everything. Mr. Alvin said to me, "Doctor, it only lasted a few seconds. I was still standing, still talking just fine." But his brain didn't quite think so. TIA, transient ischemic attack, also known as a mini-stroke, may sound mild, but it's actually the brain's most serious warning before a real stroke hits. I often compare a TIA to a flare in the sky. It shoots up once, then disappears. If we miss it, don't recognize it, we may miss the last chance to prevent something worse. Warning signs of stroke in seniors aren't always loud. They don't always knock you to the ground. They don't always twist your face or freeze half your body. Sometimes, it's just a blurry vision for a few seconds. A repeated word. A step out of rhythm. A wave of dizziness in an otherwise peaceful morning. Those silent stroke signs are your brain's final knock on the door. And you know what? Many people miss those stroke clues before attack, because they still feel fine, still walk, still speak clearly. They think, "I'm just a little tired." But behind that normal appearance, the blood vessels in the brain have already started to tighten, slow down, and wear out. That's why I always tell my patients, a TIA is not just a passing breeze. It's a vascular emergency call. And if we act fast, we just might save a life. And right after a TIA, those first 30 days are critical. That's when your brain needs you most, when every choice, even salt and sugar, becomes absolutely crucial. I still remember the look in Mr. Alvin's eyes when I told him, "This is not the time to be careless. This is the time to move slowly." Because after a TIA, the brain is like a bridge that's just been shaken. On the outside, it still looks solid. But inside, the structure is quietly cracking. And even the smallest impact could bring it all down. I told him, for the next 30 days, you'll need to live like someone walking a tightrope. Every step must be mindful. Every meal must be chosen with care. Every emotion must stay light. Because the risk of stroke after a TIA is highest within the first 48 hours. And it stays elevated throughout the first 30 days. Especially for those over 60, where stroke risk over 60 is higher, and often unfolds quietly, without warning. What you eat, drink, or neglect during this phase has a direct impact on the blood flow that feeds your brain. This is the time when brain health for seniors must be the top priority. Not through medications, but through the small choices made each day. And among all the things that need adjusting, there are two that seem minor, but silently cause the most harm: salt and sugar. And you know what? Just by cutting back on those two, the right way, for 30 days, you could set a real turning point for your brain's blood vessels. I still remember when I advised Mr. Alvin to cut back on salt and sugar, he smiled and said, "Doc, I don't eat that much. Just a few cookies, a little soup for flavor, that's all." But then I showed him his brain vessel scan. The narrow spots, the inflamed sections. They didn't come from sudden trauma. They were sprinkled in through every meal, for years. Salt and sugar, they're not just seasonings. They're too sweet, sharp blades for anyone who's just gone through a TIA. Sugar increases inflammation inside the blood vessel walls, reduces their ability to relax, and squeezes the blood flow heading to your brain. Salt causes water retention, raises blood pressure, forces the heart to pump harder, and adds pressure to brain areas that are begging for rest. And during the first 30 days after a TIA, your brain is like a wound with no scab. Sprinkle sugar, it swells up. Sprinkle salt, the flow tightens. Either one is enough to trigger a full-blown stroke. I always emphasize to my patients, stroke prevention tips don't start with pills. They start with a small spoon in your hand every day. You might feel fine. Still know your way home. Still pour your own coffee. But the signs of stroke in seniors often arrive quietly, and strike when least expected. And if you truly want to protect your voice, your memory, the first change has to begin with the spice spoon in your own kitchen. Mr. Larry, 76 years old, lives alone in rural Michigan. A kind, tidy man who never once complained about his health. One morning, he called me with a voice that sounded slightly off. "Doctor, I had a TIA the other day, but I'm fine now. I just wanted to say thank you." I gently asked, "How's your eating going?" He chuckled, "Same as always. I don't eat much. Just every evening, I have one butter cookie. It's a habit." I paused for a few seconds. Because I knew that wasn't just a cookie. For a brain that's just been through a TIA, every gram of sugar or salt is no longer just a preference, but a biological burden. A burden that can push your blood vessels to their limit. 2 weeks later, Mr. Larry was rushed to the ER. This time, it wasn't transient. This was a full-blown stroke. He had mild facial paralysis. And his voice, the warm voice that once thanked me, became slurred, as if holding on to the last echoes of itself. It broke my heart. Not just for him, but because I knew how many seniors have ignored these silent stroke signs, those missed stroke signs that seem small but are the brain's final whispers. The stroke signs most seniors miss are not always full-body paralysis. Sometimes, they are cookies, a bowl of soup, a teaspoon of sugar repeated every day. Things too small to question. And therefore, too easy to overlook. But if you're hearing me right now, and you've ever had a TIA, consider this a gift, a chance to pause, to change, and to hold on to everything that still remains. You know, after every TIA, the most dangerous thing isn't the damage in the brain, but our own early confidence. "Doctor, I feel fine now. I'm still walking, still remembering everything, still eating like normal." That's what I hear the most from my patients after a TIA. And I get it. Because a TIA passes quickly, without leaving any clear wounds. It comes and goes like a breeze. And we assume we're safe. But in reality, 70% of major strokes happen after a prior TIA. And most patients do nothing different after it, except going right back to old habits. Stroke symptoms in elderly people don't always show themselves clearly. They hide behind salty meals, sweet snacks, and sleepless nights. They don't knock loudly. They just tap once. And vanish. And if we don't open the door at the right time, there might not be a second chance. I always tell my patients, stroke warning signs aren't meant to scare you. They're a gift, a rare chance your brain gives you. People over 60 face a much higher stroke risk, because blood vessels are weaker, their walls thinner. Just a little more salt, a little more sugar, can silently split them apart. So if you just had a TIA, don't treat it as something that's over. See it as the beginning of a new chapter, where, maybe for the first time, you truly listen to your body. I often ask my patients after a TIA a very simple question: if you had a scraped knee, would you leave it alone to heal? Or keep touching it every day? Everyone answers, of course, I'd leave it alone. But then they go on eating salty foods, sugary snacks, drinking soda, adding fish sauce, more sugar. Each time they do that, it's like touching the wound in their brain, while it's trying to heal itself. You see, the brain doesn't speak like skin and flesh do. It doesn't bleed, it doesn't swell. But inside, neurons are quietly trying to reconnect, tiny blood vessels are struggling to open up and flow again. They need silence. And in that silence, there's no room for salt or sugar. I often tell my patients this: after a TIA, your brain is like a garden in drought. It doesn't need more fertilizer. It just needs you to stop digging, and give it quiet time to come back to life. That's why I say, 30 days after a TIA, let your brain breathe. Don't weigh it down with seasoning. Give it space, give it time, give it gentleness. It's not a diet. It's a deep act of love, for your memory, your clarity, and your voice. And starting here, we'll take the next step into 3 simple daily habits, so you can heal, without feeling like you're giving something up. I often tell my patients this: brain recovery doesn't happen in the hospital. It happens in your kitchen. In every meal, every sip of water, every choice you make. After a TIA, the first 30 days are like a bridge reconnecting your brain to life. And these 3 simple actions are your very first steps on that bridge. Skip the sugar, choose natural sweetness instead. If you're used to a sugar cube in your morning coffee, try a slice of ripe banana, or a spoonful of oatmeal with fresh fruit instead. Your brain doesn't need high sweetness. It needs stable blood sugar to help heal your vessels. This is one of the easiest stroke prevention tips I've ever seen work, often within just a few days. Lower the salt, but keep the flavor with herb. Salt raises pressure inside your blood vessels, something you don't want after a TIA. Instead of salty seasoning, use natural herbs like black pepper, onions, turmeric, ginger, or dill. They not only make your food more flavorful, but also help reduce inflammation and support brain circulation. This is the first habit any brain doctor for seniors would want you to start today. Write it down, a 30-day healing journal. It might sound odd, but keeping track of what you eat and how you feel each day can show you changes more clearly than any lab test. You don't have to write much. Just a few lines: no sugar today. Felt lighter in the head. And after 7 days, you might be surprised by what your brain begins to do. I've seen hundreds of people after a TIA who thought they could never return to normal life. But after just 30 small days like this, they spoke more clearly, remembered more, and felt more emotionally steady. And if you're wondering, can I really do this? Here's what I want you to know: you don't have to be perfect. Just consistent. And your brain will thank you for every one of those small choices, more than you know. One of the things I hear most from patients after a TIA is, "Doctor, I barely eat anything. It's nothing serious." And that's the quietest danger of all. Not because they're lying, but because they don't realize that just a little, repeated every day, can become a hidden flood beneath their blood vessels. A slice of cookie at night. A spoon of soy sauce for flavor. A bit of syrup in the tea to make it easier to drink. We call these comforting habits. But for a brain recovering from a TIA, they are like tiny needles poking at a wound trying to heal. You know, Many early stroke symptoms in seniors don't come from too much. They come from small things, repeated unconsciously. And sadly, many people miss these silent stroke signs, simply because they convince themselves, "I didn't eat that much." I once had a female patient who said, "I only added half a spoon of sugar to my morning coffee. I've already cut all cakes and sweets." But when we checked her blood pressure and glucose after breakfast, the results were still flashing red. That half spoon was enough to trigger inflammation in her blood vessels. And the brain can't heal under that kind of pressure. I want you to understand something: it's not about how much you eat that makes it dangerous. Eating the wrong things makes all the difference. And if you truly want to listen to your body, start by looking closely at the harmless little habits of your day. Because sometimes, that small thing is the stroke clue before attack, that no one ever saw coming. I met Mrs. Grace for the first time at the clinic in Oregon. She had a TIA while watering plants in her backyard. Everything happened in just 90 seconds. Her left hand holding the hose suddenly lost grip. Her mouth wanted to say something, but the words stumbled. Just a few minutes later, she was talking and laughing like nothing had happened. "Doctor, I feel fine," she said. But in her eyes, I saw a fear that hadn't yet found a name. I didn't give her medication right away. Instead, I handed her a 30-day roadmap. With just 3 things: no added sugar, no salted seasoning, and a short journal entry each night. On day 3, she called me. "I feel empty at meals, doctor." I gently replied, "That's not emptiness. That's your brain starting to clear out the old, so it can rebuild." By day 10, she started sleeping better. By day 17, she no longer felt dizzy when standing up quickly. And on day 29, she said a sentence I'll never forget: "I feel like there's light in my brain again." All she did was make the right choices for 30 days. No medications, no ER visits. Just love, for her memory, her clarity, and her voice. Brain health for seniors doesn't always need big interventions. It needs patience, and a small belief that your brain still knows how to heal. And if you're doubting yourself right now, remember this: if a 77-year-old woman could do it, so can you. I've seen many patients walk into my clinic, neatly dressed, walking steadily, speaking clearly. And I've heard them say, "Doctor, I'm fine. Nothing unusual at all." But when I asked more carefully, "Have you ever forgotten a familiar name for a second? Any morning where you poured coffee but your hand felt slightly off? Ever felt lightheaded when bending down and standing back up?" They hesitated, then nodded. Those are stroke symptoms in the elderly that often go unnoticed. Because they don't look like what we see in movies. No collapsing. No facial droop. No seizures. Just slight shifts in movement, memory, sensation. And because they're subtle, people dismiss them. Silent stroke signs don't scream for attention. They whisper. They scatter clues into the tiniest details of daily life. And for that reason, so many people miss their only chance for timely intervention. I call it the silent storm in the brain. The skies may still look sunny, but underneath, the vessels have started to crack. Just one salty meal. One sugary drink. One sleepless night. And the storm breaks loose. And sadly, most people who suffer a second stroke once said, "But I felt fine." So if you or someone you love just went through a TIA, don't judge by appearances alone. Look deeper into how each morning feels. Because sometimes, the fine you trust is just the mask that a stroke is wearing. Dear friend, when I advise my patients to reduce salt and sugar for 30 days after a TIA, I'm not just talking about meals. I'm talking about a chance to keep your voice. To keep the ability to call the names of those you love. To keep the clarity to find your way home. To keep your laughter intact, before time and blood vessels take it away. I once held the hand of an elderly man after a stroke, who could only utter broken sounds, though in his eyes, a whole universe of emotion was still alive. And I used to wonder, if only he had 30 more days of proper recovery, maybe. Today I would have heard his voice telling stories about his grandson, instead of just watching his eyes glisten. Every spoonful of salt you decline is one step away from narrowed vessels. Every unsweetened cup of tea you choose is one step closer to smooth, flowing blood to your brain. Stroke prevention tips aren't just theories in books. They live in your daily choices. And each of those choices is a promise you make to yourself. So please, don't think of it as restriction. Think of it as protecting what's most precious, your voice, your memory, your connections, and your very self. If you've ever gone through a TIA, if your hand has ever missed a beat, if your words ever slipped, if your loved one's eyes looked more worried than usual, I want you to know, you are not alone. I've walked beside hundreds of people over 60 through those first days after a TIA, days that feel like walking across a fragile bridge. Shaky steps, self-doubt, and the fear of what tomorrow might bring. But I've also seen them, just after 30 days of small changes, begin to clearly remember their grandchild's name, read the lines of an old book again, and speak with clarity, eyes lighting up once more. And that transformation didn't come from something magical. It came from one very simple decision: I will cut out salt and sugar for 30 days, so my brain can breathe. That's all you need to begin. Because after a TIA, your brain doesn't need an overhaul. It just needs you to stop hurting it any further. So if you're entering the 30 days post-TIA, know that this may be the most important month of your life. A month that could preserve your voice, your clarity, your memory. A month to keep living, not just surviving. And if you are on this journey, comment, I choose 30 days for my brain. Let me, and others, know that you are not walking this alone. We are a community. A circle of hands healing together. And I'll be right here, listening, guiding, and walking with you, like a friend, and as a brain doctor for seniors, always believing that rebirth can begin with just one small spoon put down.